All right, today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're doing brakes on a 2016 Tesla Model X. So this has got about a little bit over 80,000 miles on it, and brakes are starting to show their wear indicators, so you can actually see them a little bit. Getting a little old down in here, so we're going to swap them out today. Let's get started. All right, pulled the car into the garage. Before you get started, you got to go up to suspension. You got to put it to very low, and then we're going to go down to service. And we're going to put it in jack mode. And you go back up and you'll see it shows it's in jack mode. All right, now we're going to pick it up. All right, so here I am jacking up the car. Just remember there's 4 jack points for the Model X. You'll see the Ren stand I got kind of set into one of them, but there's these little points. So the Ren stand kind of duplicates as a jack stand once you pick it up. So at each of the corners, you'll see a little divot, and then that divot is where the jack where your jack point is. So don't pick it up any other place because you may damage the car. This is what the jack point actually looks like. So we got these 2 side things, but then this portion right here, that's where you're going to put the center of the jack. And then, like I said, at each of the 4 corners. Okay. All right, so the vehicle's up on jack stands. I recognize I don't need to pick up the whole vehicle. It's just when working in my garage, it's a little, tight. So it's a lot easier to just put it up all on jack stands and then go wheel to wheel after that. So I get that you could just do one at a time. All right, you may notice that it's dark out. It's because I had a little bit of a delay. So the Model X lug nuts come with these lug nut caps on them. They're these little fragile pieces of plastic. And what happens when you're looking at the wheel, there's just not enough clearance around these caps in order to get a wrench over or anything else or any normal tool. So I even bought a little lug nut cap removal tool, and it was too thick to get it over. So what it is, I went to the grocery store, I got the cheap set of tongs, pulled off the silicone, and that seems to be working perfectly for pulling off these caps. So you just reach in there, it's narrow enough, and I'm going to try a different one then. And you pull it right out. And there you go. All right, so we're going to start off with the front. There's 3 bolts and 2 pins that you're going to need to knock out in order to remove that front brake caliper and get access to the pads. So the first bolt is a T45 Torx bit, which holds the rotor on. So you'll see me removing it shortly. All right, the second part is going to be removing the 2 pins that hold the brake pads to the caliper. So first you need a metal punch to be able to punch out those pins. Just keep in mind that there's a spring that's on the top of it that kind of applies tension to the 2 pins to keep them in place. And so after you punch them free, it's really helpful to use a screwdriver to kind of relieve the tension on the pin or on the spring. So you'll be able to pull the first pin out. Once the first one's out, it's really easy to pull the second one. All right, and then that third piece is the 2 18mm bolts that hold the brake caliper to that front suspension assembly. They will require a little bit of additional torque in order to be able to remove them. So just be prepared for that. With the bolts out, at this point you just hit the caliper with a rubber mallet a little bit. Please don't use a metal one. And then once you get a little bit of space, you can use a pry bar to pry it off carefully from the rotor. So once that's clear, it's time to get the rotor off. So since nothing else is holding the rotor on, just slowly rotate it in a circle, hit it with a rubber mallet. But you can use a metal one for this one, doesn't really matter since we're not going to be reusing the rotor. But you just basically spin it a little bit and then just keep hitting it until it breaks free. All right, so for the next step, I'm gonna clean up this face just a little bit and clean out the thread for the retaining bolt. Just hit this with brake cleaner and a wire brush. And then I'm gonna compress the calipers, or the pistons inside the calipers, and I will get it put back together. All right, so I tightened them up, back them off just a little bit. Make sure it's a little bit of play so I can put the pads in fairly easily. All right, so the new pads. Before I put them in, I'm going to put a little bit of lithium grease on the sides where they're going to contact the caliper, so they move smoothly, and it should just slide right in. With them lined up, take the two retaining pins, spray both of these, a little bit of grease to get them in. All right. Bottom one first. First one seated. Just check to make sure that this one can go all the way through first. And if everything's lined up, then this one's lined up. I'm gonna push that out. I'm gonna put the retaining spring in. All right, so this retaining spring, when you're putting it in, these little wings will go down. So I'm going to slip it underneath right there. And then I'm going to push it down all the way. It's better to have like a screwdriver or something like that. It gives you some leverage. I'll push it all the way down. Make sure your pin is out of the way and slide that pin all the way in and then hammer it home. All right. That is the front assembly complete. All right, before we move to the rear, you do need to make sure you put the vehicle in tow mode. And what that'll do is that'll disable the the rear parking brake and make it so it's possible to actually remove the rear calipers. Since there's not a true transmission on these vehicles, when you put it in park, all it really does is it engage that rear parking brake, and that's what holds the vehicle in place. So yeah, you've got to put it in tow mode in order to remove that, or in order to disengage it. All right, so here we're going to get started with the rear brake assembly. This is with the wheel already off, obviously. So you'll see right up here is the emergency brake and parking brake for the Model X. And then right here is the main brake assembly. And so the rotor itself has got a T45 Torx bit bolt that you're going to have to remove in order to be able to loosen up that rotor. And then even though we're not replacing the brakes in the rear parking brake, we are still going to need to pull off this assembly. So this is a 16 millimeter and a 16 millimeter bolt. So we'll pull both of those off in order to remove this and pull it to the side. And then for the main brake assembly, there's 2 pins that we're gonna have to knock through, and then that'll help us relieve tension on this brake, or on this spring. And then we'll be able to get access to the brake pads. And then back here, there's an 18 millimeter rotor bolt there, and an 18 millimeter bolt right here. And so we'll pull all of those off, and then we'll be replacing, like I said, the pads for the main brake assembly and then the rotor itself. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so with the rotor off, you can see this is pretty nasty. So we're gonna throw some brake cleaner on there and then hit it with a wire brush. I'll clean that off, and then we'll mount the new rotor, and we'll start putting everything else back together. All right, so we put this on. I'm gonna just make sure that I line up that screw hole. You'll see one that'll be different, potentially, with the screw hole that's on there. All right, finally got a couple threads on it. All right, so next thing we're going to do, I'm going to put the parking brake back in place. Since I'm not replacing it, I am going to compress these brake pads a little bit just to make sure it gets on the rotor a little bit easier. So these bushings also, you just need to make sure you push them all the way so that they're flush, same as with the pistons on the caliper. And then it should fit on just easy. All right, so next, you take this caliper and get it ready to reinstall. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to compress the pistons inside with the C-clamp, and then I will get it mounted again and put the shoes back on. So I'm going to leave a little bit of play until I get the brakes in, and then I will tighten that up. Put a little bit of lithium grease on the edges of the brakes, because that's where they're going to contact the side. I'll make sure that they're able to move kind of freely. Should slide in pretty easily. And then I take this one, is supplied with actual pins. So I'm going to put the lower one in first, which will become extremely clear why in a moment. pound it in. You see that pin come through. Next, I'm going to take the retaining spring. I'm going to put it in. I'm going to just make sure you have these parts facing down because that's what provides that kind of spring motion or that spring effect. I'm going to take the second, and as I get it started, and I'm going to fall over my chair. I'm going to push that all the way down and slide the pin over it. And you never have a lot of room to work with on this for some reason. All right, so with the caliper on, next we're just gonna place the parking brake caliper back on. Just make sure you spread out the two pads and, you know, use some brake cleaner or whatever just to make sure it's clean and in place. Mine is going on kind of difficult, so I don't know if it's not fully disengaged, but this may be a service item issue. But this is the proper procedure. And with it being in tow mode, when I did the passenger side, it was loose when I put it back on. So this is just this caliper. All right, quick update. So the piston in the parking brake in the rear seemed to be seized up. It didn't disengage when I put it into tow mode. So what I did is I basically filled it up with PB Blaster and let it sit for about 5 or 6 hours upside down. So it all soaked into hopefully the cylinder and stuff like that, nothing important. And then I just went up and cycled it into park and then back into tow mode, and it seems to have released that piston, so it disengaged. So that is a tip. So if you see this, if you have that issue, then just kind of use some lubricant, some penetrating oil onto that piston just to make sure it's not completely seized up, and then cycle it into tow mode and then back out of tow mode. And that is what worked for me. Now it fits perfectly. So I can go ahead with finishing the installation. All right, so I take these long bolts. I'm gonna just feed them through the back, same as they took them out. Get them threaded. Remember, these are 16mm bolts. Alright, so that's the rear done. Next, we're going to finish throwing the wheels on, and we're done. We're complete with the install. Alright, the last thing you need to do as soon as you finish putting the vehicle on the ground, go through and torque each of the wheels. So the torque spec for a Model X 2016 to 2020 is going to be 129 foot-pounds. So make sure you do it as soon as it's on the ground so you don't forget. And then use that same star pattern that your mama taught you. I don't like to judge people's mothers.
The only thing left once the wheels are on is to do the bed-in procedures for the brakes. Would just suggest watching a different video for that. There's plenty of them online.